Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one, I'm going to be going over some new cards for the EAB format from Paldea Evolved. So honestly, I'm not too sure if I'll keep doing update videos for this format every set. It might move down to one every 2 sets, but we'll just have to see how it goes. That'll primarily depend on how much time I have moving forward as well, so just something worth bearing in mind. But of course, if anything changes, I will release community posts going over what the plans are. But basically, in this video, I'd like to go over the rules again for newcomers in case, you obviously don't want to go back and watch previous videos. The best engines and staples for the format, as well as, of course, the new cards from Paldea Evolved, and some deck lists to try out if you're interested in the format, which are from the previous video. I've not had time to edit or create any new decks yet, and they are more or less playing the same engines and trainers, so of course do bear that in mind, but they will be at the end of the video if you're interested. So what is EAB actually? So EAB stands for Everyone's a Basic. It's a single price format focus with some exceptions for Megas, some GX, Primes, as well as Level X in the potential future. So Level X is going to be the focus of the next video, which is, I'm honestly really excited for Level X. I can't wait to test them out. But basically, those are the mechanics of illegal. There is no plans to add V-Stars, VMAX, or current EX. You could honestly make the exception and say, you know what, we'll just play with them anyway. But in order to keep the format kind of balanced, I haven't decided to add them yet. Could find a way, but honestly, not too worried about adding them just yet. So basic Pokemon are banned. It's kind of a big deal in this format. So it means that you can only play this format in like a tabletop situation, so either IRL or with Tabletop Simulator. So there are no basic Pokemon, and you can basically just bench evolution Pokemon as if they were basics. And there's only 2 of each Pokemon per deck. Singleton, I found, was just a bit too flippant. It felt more like GLC, and worse GLC at that. 3 copies is basically just 4 copies, but a bit more awkward. 4 copies I thought would just be a bit boring, and it creates more streamlined decks, in my opinion. So playing 2 of each Pokemon just means that it's that nice sweet spot between it's not really terribly very, very consistent, but there is at least, if it does create variety within decks, I guess, between different archetypes. Abilities are also banned on the first turn for each player and activate during Pokemon checkup as soon as the first player begins turn 2. This is, of course, one of like the many optional rules that I'm experimenting with this format. It is recommended that you do this, but it's just to prevent basically from your opponent donking you going second. So that's kind of like why that ability lock is there. There is a ban list to deal with oppressed and broken decks. I haven't actually included the ban list in this video. I will recap it for the Level X video, I believe, but the ban list isn't in this video. All this means that the format, as mentioned earlier, can only be played IRL or tabletop. Proxies are legal, which does make it a bit easier to build decks, especially since cards from like the XY era, such as Megas, and even older cards like Primes and Level X's are, of course, really difficult to get a hold of and can cost a bomb, basically. So proxies being legal just makes everything, pretty much easier to build decks for, because the format's just awkward enough, basically. And stage 1s can still evolve into stage 2s. So like this is a pretty key rule because it means that combos and, well, abilities, for example, like the Obstagoon from Sword and Shield, I think is a really good example, says when it evolves from Pokemon, you get to place 3 damage counters. So you can still use stage 1s, they just have to be benched, and then you can evolve them into a stage 2 the following turn. So this is just some example of a bunch of really popular engines that I came up with. Some of these are naturally better than others, but if you look at the top left corner, I'll just go over the best ones, really. Blastoise, Cherrim, the 2 Magenzones, Hydregion, and Ember basically all have the exact same ability, which is a sort of deluge-like effect for most Pokemon. Now, Cherrim is kind of like the odd one out in that it only attaches to Pokemon without a Roblox. So, for example, Megas and GX Grass Pokemon, you won't be able to accelerate Grass Energy using Cherrim to them. But apart from that, everything else is absolutely fine. Of course, you could still use Rillaboom if you just want to pay for low energy attack costs. And there is, I believe, Totem Venusaur, which didn't make the list. And, but there's multiple options is what I'm trying to say. It's not just confined to the 6 in the top left corner. But yeah, plenty of choices for accelerating energy. Next up, just a couple of staples to consider. Delphox and Beautifly both have the same ability, Delphox having 10 HP, a little bit more HP, but Beautifly having a slightly less retreat cost. Kind of just depends whichever fits your playstyle, really. But both have the ability Mystical Fire, essentially, which allows you to draw until you have 6 cards in your hand, which is basically just an upgrade to Bibarel. So, sucks to be Bibarel, I guess, in this format. But Delphox, Beautifly, very nice draw power. Also got Machoke, which is bench protection, but also from abilities. So abilities like Inteleon that would place damage counters are prevented by Machoke, and it also keeps spread decks in check, so anything that would do massive spread damage, Machoke kind of controls them. We also got Venusaur, which has the ability Fluorescent, allowing you to search your deck for Pokemon. There is a Nidoqueen with this exact same ability, but Nidoqueen is currently banned in the format due to its very, very powerful attack, so Venusaur fills that role quite nicely. Also got Incineroar to increase your damage by plus 30, and then Aegislash to reduce damage by 30. So next up is we've got some new Pokemon from Paldea Evolved. I just want to quickly draw attention to Pokemon that I would personally recommend that people don't use, which is Raichu, Satitan, Corviknight, Slacking, and the new Tyranitar. I think all of these Pokemon are really cool, and I think they're great in, well, not great, but, pretty fun in Standard and GLC. But unfortunately, I think these Pokemon are just a wee bit too strong for this format, which is a bit of a shame because I want to include as many Pokemon as I can because of how limited it already is. But still, these Pokemon are very, very powerful compared to a lot of the others, and it kind of just makes sense to want to, control the power levels a bit, I guess. But some of the new Pokemon that are added that are pretty cool. Joffrey, I don't think is the best, to be honest, but Baxcalibur is another way to accelerate energy. Tinkerton has decent draw capabilities for a psychic deck, as well as having attack special hammer, which is pretty solid. Bramblegast can increase the attack cost. Nice have retreat cost there, but it is attack cost. Hydregion is an alternate way of accelerating energy if you're playing it with the Hydregion Break, which needs a psychic and a dark energy. A list for which we'll look at later, but it is playing the older Hydreigon. And the new Gyarados, which has the attack Revengeful Storm, but does 80 damage and then 100 more if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent. Next up, here's just a bunch of stage 1s and stage 2s that I kind of singled out as being pretty interesting. Kilowattrel, I would say, is pretty cool. Jetwing doing 150 is really solid damage, also has free retreat. Other stuff like Spidops, which can force the opponent's active to shuffle in. Farigiraf? I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name, but basically the giraffe in the middle left corner-esque. With the attack either face, choose a player. That player shoves a hand, draws 4. This can be used going second, so pretty devastating attack. The Dunsparce for some Polaris loops, and then Gilmora can potentially deny prizes, and Gargankle provides decent healing throughout the turns. So yeah, just some Pokemon that I wanted to draw attention to. Of course, if there's any other stage 1s and stage 2s that were mentioned on either of these slides, basically just means I didn't think they were great, but that doesn't mean to say they're not banned or anything. They're just kind of mediocre, I guess, so they weren't really worth mentioning. Yeah, there's some of the best new trainers that worth talking about. Fighting Mill, Giacomo. Grusha, surprisingly, with stuff like Omega Break, is pretty strong. Iono is obviously really good. Lesson Studio, if you're running a stage 1 toolbox. And then Jet Energy is also okay, to be honest, if you need to switch around between a bunch of Pokemon. Reverse Energy, unfortunately, I would say is a bit too strong for this format. But, again, if you want to experiment with banned cards, that's absolutely fine. So just looking at this first list very quickly, I won't spend very long on each of these lists because they are built using the same kind of engine with trainers and Pokemon. But this is focused around the Rampardos as well as Luxray. It is having a focus on the Garbodor with Garbotoxin as well, so you can try and use Ability Lock and then focus on some really cheap attacks, like Beedrill with Poisonous Sting, as well as Flygon with Desert Pillar. Is this deck very good? Honestly, I think this could be one of the best decks in the format. It's just focused on high efficient damage and hits for multiple different weaknesses. Pretty cool deck and pretty fun to play. Next one is definitely a fighting type focus deck. Unfortunately, though, I made a bit of an error when I was crafting this deck in that it doesn't really have that many stadiums, and Primal Groudon's whole gimmick revolves around discarding stadiums to do more damage. So Primal Groudon really should be paired with more stadiums, but yeah, a bit of an error on my part for sure. But it can combo nicely with Machamp. Machoke is already a great stable card in the format, so being able to evolve into a Machamp to potentially increase your damage if that's what you really want to do, then it is an option, which is nice. Also got Porygon Z to accelerate Special Energy, which is kind of funky. it does mean that we can make use of both Stone Fighting Energy and Strong Energy to both reduce damage and increase damage. And then if we want to just accelerate basic energy effectively, we do have the Blend Energy. So nice options overall. And of course, Rampardos doing 120 to an evolution Pokemon for a single energy is pretty strong. So yeah, pretty cool deck overall, to be honest. Next up is we actually have the first deck that I ever built for this format to test out against other decks. And that's like a Deluge box with Kingdra, which is an amazing attacker, Swampert, which is probably one of the best Pokemon in the format, to be honest, Wailord, and Samurott. Water types honestly have some of the best attackers overall for stage 2s and stage 1s. So I wouldn't be surprised if, we see even more powerful stage 1s and stage 2s for water types in the future. But yeah, definitely a very strong deck, especially when you consider Dive Ball and Evolution Incense basically do the exact same thing more or less for this deck, especially in terms of attackers. And you can run Octillery, which ultimately I think in testing I decided having both Octillery and Delphox was a bit overkill. And you could probably remove one copy of Octillery or one copy of Delphox. But either way, pretty cool list, and it does, give me an excuse to use at least one of the Wailords. Next up is kind of like a Luxray Break style deck, still focused around one of the better attackers in the format, Luxray, with the attacks Flash Impact and Energy Crush, but still also using Dracozolt and Magnezone. So Magnezone can accelerate loads of lightning energy, and we want to use Dracozolt to do 200 damage for a bunch of energy, and it will discard energy as well, or actually I believe it says it can't attack next turn, but shouldn't be too much of a problem, and it still has 160 HP, so it's not the worst either. Either way, decent attacks, to be honest. Magenzo can also accelerate to Luxray Break if you want to use its better attack, I guess. But to be honest, Energy Crush and Flash Impact are just as good, if not better. So still decent options. And of course, Lightning types have access to Electropower. So yeah, pretty gnarly, to be honest. Next up is like a bit of a Grass Toolbox style deck with Mega Sceptile, making use of Beautifly, which is really handy because that means we can use stuff like Turffield Stadium and Revitalizer. We've also got stuff like the Ancient Trait Dustox, which says has the Ancient Trait Plus, I should say, which says if you KO a Pokemon with one of its attacks, you take an extra prize card. Now, it only does 50 damage snipe for 3 energy, so of course you will have to time this quite nicely, but grass types have the somewhat distinctive weakness in this format of not actually having very high damage output, like at all. It seems like all the best grass types in the TCG in the past have been basics, really. So most of the stage 1s and stage 2s, with like the exception of Beedrill, have been fairly weak. I guess Meganium's pretty decent. That can increase its damage and is pretty solid if you're behind on prize cards. Ludicolo's also like really wild. The Vini is pretty decent, but to be honest, because you're doing fairly low damage output, you shouldn't be one at carrying stuff, and then you can hopefully finish something off with a Dustox. Combine it with Venusaur with Jungle Totem, and then, just KO something and take an extra prize card. So pretty cool list overall. Then we've got this kind of like Hydregion Break / Trinitar from Fate's Collide. So this is an example of a deck that's trying to use maybe an ability that evolves from a stage 1. So our whole idea here is that we bench Pupitar and then we evolve Trinitar later on in the game, so we can accelerate a bunch of Dark Energy to Trinitar and then do a massive amount of damage. Also got the Hydregion Break. So what we can do is bench Hydregion, accelerate all the Dark Energy that we need, and then all we have to do at that point is just attach at least one Psychic Energy, and then we can start using Hydregion Break to attack. Also got other attackers like Glowing Obstagoon, which is a very efficient attacker overall, just to kind of help us do efficient damage throughout most of the game. But yeah, pretty straightforward list. The second to last one, I believe, is going to be a bit of a double colors toolbox deck, featuring both Twin Energy and double colors, because we're not playing any real boxes, so we might as well just run the 4-4 split. We're running 2 Zoroark with Mind Jack and Stand-In, very efficient card. Gallade is also really solid with Premonition and Sensitive Blade, very easy requirements to meet. Delphox has Energy Crush, similar to Luxray, but it's just for 2 colors. Still pretty solid attacker overall, especially if you want to hit Fire Weakness. Ludicolo's we saw earlier in the grass deck with Spiteful Retribution, I believe it's called. For 2 colors, 60 damage for each prize card your opponent's taken. Very efficient attacker overall. And then Raichu with Circle Circuit, doing more damage for each bench Pokemon in play. So then lastly, I believe, this is going to be the Psychic deck. Now, unfortunately, Psychic is a bit more rough, I would say, in EAB compared to some other formats, because Psychic typically likes to focus around placing damage counters, and Machoke just walls out damage counters, so Gourgeist with Spirit Scream won't be effective. Sometimes you will have to bear that in mind, but I guess you could try and fit in Garbodor to turn off Machoke, so maybe Garbodor with Floatstone could be a decent option here. But this is, of course, trying to focus around getting one-hit KOs with like Gourgeist and Inteleon. We've also got Chandelure, which isn't like the worst attacker in the world, definitely a good finisher, I should say. And then Dragapult is also really nice, doing 130 and then a little bit of spread damage counters, while also having the ability Infiltrator, potentially preventing any damage done to it. We also got the Gardevoir, which basically means that those 3 key psychic attackers can attack for 1 psych energy as long as we have 1 attached. Then we can kind of like stack up damage with Spell Tag and Horror Psychic Energy. But yeah, thank you for watching. Any feedback for this format would of course be appreciated. I love to continue making videos for these type formats, I guess. But you know, it kind of depends if people are interested enough to how frequent these videos are. It is unfortunately limited to IRL tabletop, but I do recommend giving this format a go if you want to. And the next video will hopefully cover level X Pokemon, potentially the last mechanic to be added to the game until something more balanced comes along. So I'm guessing after EX Pokemon, then Pokemon might be like, they might scale back, I guess, the mechanics, because V-Stars were scale back version of VMAX, and then EX were scale back version of V-Stars. So hopefully we'll get something a little bit more balanced. I have definitely considered adding 1 or 2 V-Stars because there is some like unknown V-Star, for example, which I think are harmless, but you know, it's kind of hard to justify adding something like Giratina V-Star or Lugia when, you know, the format is kind of wanting to focus on more retro evolved Pokemon like Megas and Primes. So yeah, Level X should be an interesting addition, but we'll see you next video, I guess. So yeah, this has been Power, and yeah, thank you for watching.